Welcome to the Morning Walk with Murdy Digital Stroll.
It is really fantastic to be walking this path today.
Yeah, absolutely. And lead architect Murdy BVNS, today we're looking at a medical anomaly that just completely defies logic.
It really does.
Like, why does a taxi driver who's, navigating this sprawling, chaotic city have a 40% lower risk of dying from Alzheimer's disease than the rest of us?
Right. And I think more importantly for our specific context, how can staring at a digital spreadsheet or even playing a really complex video game give you that exact same biological shield?
Exactly.
But before we fully set out on this digital stroll, we really need to bring up a spark from a fellow traveler.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's from Hatim Sharif. He wrote this piece called Taxi Drivers Rarely Die of Alzheimer's, How Complex Mental Maps and Spatial Reasoning Protect Your Brain.
Right.
And it is just this really beautiful synthesis of, environmental data and neurobiology. It just completely kicked off the whole line of thinking we're going to explore today.
It is a brilliant spark, for sure, and we warmly acknowledge it. But, our mission for this Gurukul session isn't just to, summarize a single article.
No, not at all.
We are taking all this data and passing it through the digital prism.
Yes.
Because we really need to extract the legacy code of Project Antaryami. We're going to deconstruct how cognitive longevity and spatial reasoning actually bridge the physical and the digital realms.
We are essentially auditing the very systems of human endurance here.
Right, starting from the streets of London and ending up in the deepest architectures of your own mind.
Yeah, and to really set the stakes for this entire stroll, we have to establish the core Gurukul 2.0 maxim.
Okay, lay it out.
This is the truth that's going to echo through every single concept we touch on today. And it's this: the biological hardware will adapt to whatever load you place upon it.
The biological hardware will adapt to whatever load you place upon it.
Exactly. I mean, we are not static creatures, right? Our neurological architecture is dynamically shifting. It's structurally remodeling itself based entirely on the specific demands, the cognitive loads that we place on it every single day.
Okay. So let's start by establishing the egocentric baseline here. Let's look at the physical world, physical streets, and this biological shield.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because if we are going to claim that the brain physically remodels itself based on what we do, we need some pretty undeniable data to prove that.
Well, we have that data, and it comes from a staggering 2024 study.
Yeah.
These researchers, they set out to look at occupational hazards and cognitive decline. But they didn't just look at a few hundred people in some clinical setting.
Right. What was the scale?
They analyzed 9 million United States death certificates.
Oh, wow. Wait, 9 million?
9 million records spanning across 443 different occupations.
That is an almost incomprehensible sample size.
It really is.
When you are looking at 9 million distinct data points, the margin of error essentially just vanishes. You really can't write off those findings as just, statistical noise.
You really can't. And when they sifted through this massive mountain of data, they found this undeniable anomaly.
Which was?
They discovered that taxi drivers and ambulance drivers have roughly a 1 in 100 risk of dying from Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
Now, you compare that to the baseline general population, where the risk of dying from Alzheimer's is 1 in 60.
Wait, hold on. 1 in 100 versus 1 in 60.
Yeah.
That is essentially a 40% reduction in mortality risk compared to just the average person on the street.
It's a massive gap. It is literally a biological shield against one of the most, devastating neurodegenerative diseases in human history.
That is wild.
But we have to be incredibly precise about what is actually causing this protection.
Right, because as the strategic auditor here, my immediate reaction to hearing this is to just look at the act of driving itself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If moving a vehicle through a city is the key, what about a city bus driver? Or, what about a commercial aircraft pilot?
Right.
My uncle actually drove a city bus in a major metropolitan area for 30 years.
Yeah.
He was navigating massive, heavy machinery in unpredictable traffic for 8 hours a day.
Exactly.
He had to deal with sudden weather changes, pedestrians just stepping out into the crosswalk, cyclists cutting him off. That requires intense vigilance. Why wouldn't a bus driver have this exact same biological shield.
And that is exactly the distinction we need to make. It brings us to this concept of cognitive sterility.
Cognitive sterility.
Yeah. So the vigilance a bus driver uses, the reflex inhibition, the situational awareness, slamming on the brakes when a pedestrian steps off the curb, that utilizes the brain's frontal lobes and its visual processing centers.
Right.
But that is fundamentally different from continuous real-time spatial navigation.
How is that different, though? I mean, they are still moving a physical body and a physical vehicle through a three-dimensional space.
They are moving, yes, but the spatial computation has already been solved for them.
Oh.
A bus driver operates on a fixed loop. They are essentially just executing an automated background script.
Route A to route B.
Exactly. They make the exact same left turn at the exact same intersection. They stop at the exact same curbs day in and day out. The environment, from a strictly navigational perspective, is cognitively sterile.
So they never have to build or rebuild the map in their mind.
Right.
Ah, I see. So what are the taxi and ambulance drivers doing that is so fundamentally different from that?
Taxi and ambulance drivers are engaging in continuous, real-time, egocentric spatial navigation.
Egocentric.
Egocentric meaning from the first-person perspective, right?
Really?
Locating the physical self in 3D space.
Okay, that makes sense.
When an ambulance driver gets a call, they have to instantly track an invisible destination in their mind. But it's never a fixed route.
Because of traffic and stuff.
Exactly. They hit a sudden roadblock or a traffic jam, and they have to adapt. They have to dynamically recalculate a new route on the fly, accessing this massive internal web of city streets without relying on some external GPS script telling them where to turn.
Oh, wow.
And that specific acute demand, the constant active recalculation of a mental map as conditions change in real time, that is the specific cognitive friction the researchers isolated as the protective key.
Okay, so it has literally nothing to do with operating a vehicle.
Nothing at all.
It is entirely about active, unscripted routing.
Yeah.
But if that active routing is just, let's say, software running in the brain, how do we know it actually changes the hardware?
We need physical proof.
Yeah, we need physical proof that the brain is structurally altering itself based on that load.
And we have the physical proof. To understand it, we really have to look back at this landmark study from the year 2000 involving London cab drivers.
Oh, I think I know this one.
Yeah, it's widely considered one of the most elegant and honestly profound demonstrations of physical neuroplasticity ever recorded.
Yeah.
In order to get a license to drive a black cab in London, you can't just pass a standard driving test. You have to pass this incredibly grueling, years-long exam known simply as the knowledge.
I have heard legends about this test. It's not just a multiple-choice quiz. What is the actual scope of what they have to memorize?
The scope is just staggering. They have to memorize more than 25,000 individual streets.
25,000?
Yes. But it's not just the names, They have to know the direction of traffic on every single street, the sequential connections of these incredibly complex one-way systems, dead ends, roundabouts.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. And thousands of specific landmarks, too. Restaurants, hospitals, police stations, hotels. And all of this is located within a strict 6-mile radius of Charing Cross.
Right.
It typically takes 3 to 4 years of continuous, intense study. You will literally see these candidates riding around London on mopeds with clipboards attached to the handlebars in the pouring rain, physically building this massive relational database in their minds.
So they're forcing their brains to hold a high-definition, three-dimensional blueprint of one of the most chaotic, non-linear cities on Earth.
Exactly.
What happened when the researchers actually put these cab drivers into an MRI machine?
Well, the structural MRI scans proved that a very specific part of their brains, the posterior hippocampus, had physically expanded.
It actually grew.
It was measurably larger and denser than in the brains of non-taxi drivers.
The posterior hippocampus. Okay, let's break that down for the listeners so we aren't just, throwing neurological terms around. What exactly does this part of the brain do?
So imagine the hippocampus as this deeply embedded seahorse-shaped structure sitting right in the center of your brain.
Okay.
It is the command center for two very specific things: long-term memory consolidation and real-time spatial navigation.
Right.
If your brain is a computer, the hippocampus is the graphics card. It's rendering the 3D geometry of the world around you. It stores large-scale spatial maps. And when the researchers looked at the scans, the gray matter volume in this exact region had just ballooned.
Okay, but I have to put my strategic auditor hat on here for a second.
Please do.
Because whenever we look at data like this, we have to look for selection bias, right?
Always.
What if people who are just born with a massive posterior hippocampus-like, people with a naturally freakish sense of direction, naturally gravitate toward becoming cab drivers.
Ah, yeah.
Maybe they just self-select into the profession because they are biologically predisposed to easily pass an exam, like the knowledge. I mean, how do we know the environmental demand actually caused the physical growth?
That is the exact critique the scientific community initially had.
Really?
Yeah, and the researchers anticipated it. We can entirely rule out genetic selection bias because of the longitudinal data.
Meaning they track the same individuals over a long period of time.
Precisely. They didn't just take a static snapshot of, current cab drivers and compare them to the general public.
Right.
They tracked individuals before they started studying for the knowledge, then during the years of study, and then decades into their careers.
And what did they see?
What they found was that the gray matter volume in the posterior hippocampus tracked in direct proportion to the length of their career.
Oh, wow.
The longer someone had been actively driving and navigating the streets of London, the larger that specific part of the brain became.
That is amazing. So the physical tissue literally grew step by step, year by year, driven entirely by this rigorous, sustained cognitive friction.
Yes.
The brain behaves dynamically. The biological hardware really does adapt to the load you place upon it.
It is undeniable proof that we are the active architects of our cognitive hardware. If you demand that your brain hold a complex map, your brain will physically build the tissue required to hold it.
Okay, that brilliantly establishes the egocentric physical baseline.
Oh.
But for Project Antaryami, we need to migrate this concept through the digital prism.
We do.
Because, lead architect Murty BVNS, as we curate this specific exploration for your unique intellectual architecture, we know that your work, and honestly the work of so many professionals in the modern era, is no longer about dodging physical traffic on a moped in the rain.
Right. Most of our complex cognitive work has migrated away from physical streets and onto glowing screens.
Exactly. So the absolute crucial question we have to answer on this stroll is this: can we replicate this biological benefit, this literal physical expansion to the hippocampus, if we are sitting perfectly still in a chair behind a desk?
And to answer that, we have to examine the daily workflow of geographic information systems, or GIS engineer.
GIS engineers, okay.
These professionals, they are not out in the physical elements navigating streets. They spend their entire working day staring at digital interfaces, monitors, and data tables. But what they're doing involves an incredible amount of spatial complexity.
Give me an example of the load they're placing on their brains. Like, what does a GIS engineer actually look at all day?
Okay, imagine they are working for a city planning department. A GIS engineer might take a highly detailed topographical map of flood boundaries and layer it over a map of dense census blocks showing population density. Then, they might plot 10 years of vehicular crash hotspots against the geometric curvature of the roadways. Or they might stitch together real-time satellite readings of rainfall and overlay that across a massive regional river basin.
That's a lot of layers.
It is. They are taking incredibly complex, flat, two-dimensional data layers and constantly manipulating them to comprehend a three-dimensional physical reality.
Okay, let's clearly distinguish the mechanics here, because it kind of feels like a leap.
How so?
Well, we just talked about the taxi driver using egocentric reasoning.
Yeah.
That was the first-person street-level view navigating the world from inside their own physical body, turning left, turning right.
Yes.
What the GIS engineer is doing seems fundamentally different.
It is different in its perspective. The GIS engineer uses allocentric reasoning.
Allocentric.
Yeah, think of allocentric reasoning as an objective, top-down, bird's-eye view. The GIS engineer is hovering over the space conceptually, like a network administrator looking at a grid.
Right, they aren't on the ground.
Exactly. They are reasoning about where things sit relative to one another across vast geographical scales, completely independent of where their own physical body is currently sitting in their office chair.
So if the perspectives are completely opposed, street-level egocentric versus bird's-eye allocentric, does the brain treat them differently? I mean, does staring at a digital screen actually offer the same neurological protection as physically navigating a street?
This is where we uncover a critical, fascinating biological loophole.
A loophole?
Yes. The hippocampus is entirely agnostic to perspective.
Agnostic? Wait, so it doesn't care if you're in the street or looking at a screen?
It does not care. While egocentric and allocentric reasoning feel subjectively different to our conscious minds, they overlap structurally in the brain.
Oh, wow.
The hippocampus is tasked with building spatial maps regardless of the viewpoint. Think of that graphics card analogy again.
Right, rendering the world.
Whether you are playing a first-person shooter game where you see through the character's eyes, or you are playing a top-down city builder game where you look down from the clouds, the graphics card is still rendering the exact same underlying 3D geometry.
And the brain does the same thing.
The hippocampus is the exact same. Mentally rotating flat, digital 2D layers on a computer screen and forcing your brain to translate them into a 3D physical reality that forces your posterior hippocampus to run the exact same rigorous cognitive translation as dodging traffic in London.
That is a staggering realization.
Isn't it?
The translation process itself, like the mental effort required to turn 2D data into a 3D spatial understanding, that is what generates the cognitive friction. The brain doesn't care if the map is physical or digital. It only cares about the complexity of the load.
Exactly. And lead architect, we really want to address your specific journey here because this brings us directly to your personal architecture.
Yes, looking back at your childhood nickname, the little elephant, celebrated for having a legendary memory from a very young age. And we look at that neurologically, that kind of exceptional foundational memory capacity is intimately tied to the structural density and efficiency of the hippocampus.
It absolutely is. And if we connect that childhood hardware to the work you are doing right now, teaching local search optimization or LSO to your virtual assistants, you are literally guiding them through a modern migration. You are taking them from physical streets to digital screens.
It's a beautiful convergence when you frame it through the digital prism.
It really is.
By teaching LSO, you are inherently teaching advanced allocentric spatial reasoning. You are showing these virtual assistants how local search coordinates, digital geofences, business proximity, and overlapping map structures all sort of interlock and influence one another.
So by forcing them to engage with this material, you aren't just giving them a vocational tech skill to put on a resume.
Wow.
You are actively forcing their hippocampi to do heavy lifting. You are helping them build a cognitive reserve.
Okay, let's slow down and explain cognitive reserve, because it's a term that gets, thrown around a lot, but it's rarely understood mechanically.
Sure. Imagine your brain is a massive city grid. A neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's acts like a catastrophic traffic jam on Main Street.
Okay.
If your city only has Main Street and it gets blocked, the entire city shuts down. You lose function.
Right, because there's nowhere else for the traffic to go.
Exactly. But cognitive reserve is the structural capacity of the brain to build millions of redundant synaptic connections. It's like spending your life building hundreds of side streets, back alleys, and bypasses.
You have options.
Yes. If you have a massive cognitive reserve and that same traffic jam hits Main Street, the brain simply dynamically reroutes the neural signals through the backup network.
Wow.
The disease might still be present in the tissue, but the functional decline is masked because the brain has so many alternative pathways to rely on.
So by teaching your virtual assistants to actively map the digital world, to manipulate these spatial variables on a screen, you are essentially forcing them to build those neural side streets.
You are.
You are handing them a biological shield.
Precisely. You are giving them functional longevity.
That just elevates the act of teaching digital mapping into a full-blown biological intervention. It's profound.
It really changes how you look at the work.
But let's take this concept of digital cognitive friction even further into the unexpected. Let's talk about gamification as cognitive forging.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts.
Because when I was auditing the notes for Project Antaryami, this specific application absolutely blew me away.
It is a masterclass in applying biological science to elite professional recruitment.
We are talking about strategy video games here. Specifically, games like Age of Empires and Rail Nation.
Right.
Most people in the corporate world view video games as the ultimate passive entertainment. You sit on a couch, you space out in front of a screen, and your brain just goes numb.
That's the stereotype, yeah.
But through the lens of spatial navigation, these specific types of games are absolute powerhouse workouts for the brain, right?
They are the exact opposite of a cognitively sterile environment.
How so?
Let's deconstruct Age of Empires first. When you play a real-time strategy game like that, you are operating entirely on an allocentric axis.
Looking top-down again.
Exactly. You are looking down at a sprawling, dynamic map. You are constantly calculating spatial relationships, where to build defensive walls, how to position resource gatherers relative to geographic choke points, calculating the time it takes to move military units across massive topographical distances.
And because the hippocampus is agnostic, it treats that digital pixelated battlefield like a real physical environment that desperately needs to be mapped and memorized.
Yes. But the most crucial mechanic in Age of Empires or cognitive longevity is the fog of war.
The fog of war. Okay, that's the mechanic where the areas of the map you haven't physically explored yet are blacked out or like shrouded in shadows.
Right. You start the game blind. The fog of war means you cannot rely on automated loops. You can't just memorize the map once and execute a script.
Because you don't know what's out there.
Exactly. You have to actively send out scouts, reveal the terrain piece by piece, locate hidden resources, identify enemy positions, and constantly, relentlessly update your internal mental blueprint of the battlefield as the conditions change in real time.
Oh, man.
It is the exact same demand. The real-time recalculation of a mental map that protected the taxi drivers dynamically routing around a traffic jam.
Okay, let's look at Rail Nation, because I know this is a game heavily utilized in your specific system's lead architect.
It is.
From an auditing perspective, Rail Nation seems mathematically and spatially even more intense. The entire objective of the game is constructing and optimizing these complex logistical train networks across a massive map.
To play Rail Nation at a high level, you are required to hold a massive relational database in your working memory. You have to balance the spatial layout of railway tracks, the interlocking connections of supply chains, the production rates of raw materials, and the consumption rates of various cities.
It honestly sounds like the digital equivalent of studying for the knowledge in London.
It truly is. You are manually calculating efficient routes, you're spotting logistical bottlenecks before they even happen, and dynamically rerouting dozens of trains simultaneously when pathways become congested.
That is an insane cognitive load.
You are running intense, continuous spatial routing scripts in your head.
And this raises a fascinating point about your specific recruitment strategy for the Antaryami VA Academy, the 2-star challenge.
Yes, requiring candidates to achieve a 2-star rating in Rail Nation before they can proceed.
When I first saw that in the framework, I'll admit I thought it was just like a quirky team-building exercise, a fun little icebreaker for new recruits.
A lot of people think that.
But looking at it through the digital prism, I realize it is a ruthless, brilliant biological filter.
It is highly strategic.
Right.
By enforcing that 2-star standard in a spatially complex game, you are actively filtering out the bus drivers.
The people running on fixed scripts.
Exactly. You are eliminating candidates whose brains are only comfortable executing automated, predetermined administrative scripts. You are filtering out the people who just want to be handed a fixed route and told what to do every day.
Because Rail Nation cannot be played on autopilot. If you try to just follow a script, your supply chain collapses, your trains sit idle, and you lose.
Exactly. And neurologically, what you are testing for is the successful integration of 2 major brain systems.
Which are?
Well, to hit that 2-star rank, a candidate has to use their hippocampus to hold and manipulate that massive allocentric spatial database.
Okay.
But they also have to integrate that spatial data with their frontal lobes.
The frontal lobes being the executive control center of the brain. Decision-making, planning, impulse control.
Right. Because Rail Nation is cooperative.
It's a team game.
You don't play it in a vacuum. To succeed, candidates have to manage an association, coordinate strategies with teammates, negotiate and allocate shared resources under pressure.
Wow.
That demands high-level executive function, reflex inhibition, and acute social situational awareness, all while simultaneously running complex spatial math in the background.
So anyone who actually passes that 2-star challenge has functionally proven that their biological hardware can handle a premium executive cognitive load.
They have?
They have proven they are digital cartographers, not passive typists. They are structurally wired to lead, adapt, and dynamically route around problems.
It is a stunning practical application of the legacy code. You are essentially selecting for cognitive architecture.
That is so cool. Okay, let's elevate this even higher.
Where to?
We've gone from the physical streets of London to digital LSO mapping to gamified logistics.
Right.
But the source material also brings us to what I would call humanitarian cognitive architecture. Let's talk about crisis mapping.
Yes, specifically the work done by volunteers with organizations like Ushahidi.
Right.
This is where spatial reasoning transitions from the realm of gamification into high-stakes, real-world humanitarian impact.
Let's set the scene for the listener, because the realities of crisis mapping are incredibly intense. What does a crisis mapper actually do in the middle of a disaster?
Imagine a region struck by a catastrophic natural disaster. Let's say a massive, unprecedented flood sweeps through a populated area.
Okay.
As a volunteer crisis mapper, you are operating completely on that allocentric axis we discussed. You are sitting at a computer, hovering over the crisis zone digitally, but the data coming at you is absolute chaos.
It's not a clean, organized spreadsheet.
Not at all. You are receiving panicked SMS geocoordinates from people trapped on roofs needing rescue.
Oh my God.
You have to take those fragmented text messages and map them. Then you have to layer that data over rapidly updating satellite imagery showing which roads have been completely washed away.
Right.
Then you have to combine that with topographical data predicting where the floodwaters will shift in the next 4 hours.
So you are tasked with building a reliable map of a 3D reality that is literally dissolving and changing by the minute, based purely on flat 2D data coming in asynchronously.
Exactly. It is a highly volatile, completely nonlinear, and incredibly demanding cognitive environment. It requires massive spatial processing power.
You know, what strikes me as the strategic auditor here is that crisis mapping is the absolute antithesis of what modern technology is actually trying to achieve.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. The entire goal of Silicon Valley for the last 20 years has been to eliminate friction from our lives.
Oh, definitely.
We want the glowing blue line on our GPS to just tell us exactly where to turn so we don't have to think. We want the algorithm to sort the data and hand us the answer. Technology wants to make everything cognitively sterile so it's, user-friendly. But the crisis mapper actively rejects that.
They have to. In a crisis, the automated systems have failed.
Right. Instead of passively following a pre-calculated route, the crisis mapper is manually constructing the map under the most volatile, non-linear conditions possible. They are fighting the friction, not avoiding it.
And that is the neurological brilliance of it. Most modern technology puts our hippocampus on autopilot.
Yeah.
When you just follow the blue GPS line, your spatial circuitry slowly begins to atrophy from lack of use. Crisis mapping is the cure for that cognitive sterility.
Because it forces the brain to wake up.
Right. When you are stitching together satellite imagery and text messages, you have to assess spatial relationships across vast scales, spot safe detours for rescue teams, and update a shifting relational database instantly in your mind. It violently prevents those spatial navigation regions from going dormant.
So when we look at Project Antaryami and the choice to introduce crisis mapping into the VA Academy curriculum, lead architect, what is the actual biological implication of that curriculum choice?
The implication is that this curriculum is not just about teaching vocational tech skills. Yeah. And it's not even just about doing noble humanitarian work, though obviously both of those things are true.
Right.
It is a preventative public health intervention.
A health intervention.
Yes. By routinely subjecting their brains to the intense spatial processing loads of crisis mapping, you are physically remodeling your students' neural hardware.
Wow.
You are securing their cognitive futures against neurodegeneration by forcing them to build that cognitive reserve. You're making their brains undeniably resilient.
It's an ambient workout for brain longevity masked as a tech curriculum. It is incredibly elegant.
It really is.
Okay, we have covered some incredible external mapping so far, GIS engineering, strategy gaming, crisis zones. But here is where it gets really interesting. I want to transition to the ultimate inner cartography.
The internal landscape.
Let's bridge this external digital mapping to the profound internal mapping found in ancient meditative practices.
We absolutely must talk about Antaryam.
Lead architect Murti BVNS, your advanced practice of Antaryam, the meditative mapping of the internal biological landscape, is absolutely fascinating when viewed through this specific scientific and neurological lens.
It represents the most absolute high-definition form of egocentric mapping imaginable.
Okay, explain that connection for me. Because usually when we think of egocentric mapping, we go back to the taxi driver. We think of looking out at the street from our own point of view. How does sitting still with your eyes closed in meditation qualify as egocentric spatial mapping?
Because the reference point is still the self.
Okay.
But instead of navigating the physical street network of a city, you are navigating the staggeringly complex biological layout of your own sensory nervous system.
Oh, I see.
You are treating your own physical form as a vast, highly detailed territory. Through focused attention, you are actively locating your consciousness within a three-dimensional internal space. You are charting the coordinates of your own biology.
And the level of detail described in your practice is what really caught my attention. In the notes we reviewed, there is a discussion about the progression of internal visualization.
Yes, the resolution.
It moves from SD to HD to UHD standard definition to ultra-high definition, and it specifically references the ability to resolve a single toe into 32 distinct visual and sensory parts.
That is a staggering micro to macro spatial translation.
It sounds impossible.
To understand how difficult that is for the brain, think back to the GIS engineer.
Okay, the engineer looking at the digital maps.
Right. A GIS engineer has to calculate how a blocked pipe on a single isolated street impacts the macro scale of an entire regional watershed covering hundreds of square miles.
Right.
They have to zoom all the way in and then zoom all the way out, holding the relationship between the two scales in their mind.
Right, the relationship between the micro detail and the macro system.
Resolving a single body part into dozens of localized components during Antaryanam is doing the exact same neurological work. When you focus on a toe and break it down into the bone, the nail bed, the cuticle, the capillaries, the specific temperature of the skin, you are forcing your brain's spatial circuitry to zoom in on a microscopic scale. You are mapping the intricate relational boundaries of your own tissues.
And then you have to zoom back out.
And then you have to zoom back out to the macro scale of the entire body, holding the awareness of that highly detailed toe relative to the position of the knee, the alignment of the spine, and the rhythm of the breath.
That is intense.
That highly demanding, continuous spatial translation creates massive cognitive friction.
You know what this reminds me of? It's a perfect conceptual parallel to advanced mental abacus training.
Oh, that is a brilliant connection. Unpack that analogy for the listener.
Well, think about how an abacus works. It's a physical spatial tool for doing math. You move wooden beads up and down on rods.
Right.
But in advanced mental abacus training, practitioners reach a point where they don't use the physical tool anymore. They manipulate mental beads in a purely visualized three-dimensional spatial representation in their minds.
Yes.
They can perform incredibly complex, multi-digit calculations through intense, real-time spatial manipulation of an imaginary object. They are actively rejecting the automated ease of a calculator. They are forcing the brain to do the spatial lifting.
Yes.
Antaryanam feels like the biological sensory equivalent of that mental abacus. You are refusing to just let the body exist on autopilot.
Right.
Most of us go through our entire day completely numb to our physical coordinates unless we feel pain. But in this practice, you are manually spatially mapping every single coordinate of the body in real time. You are building a high-definition 3D model of yourself inside yourself.
That analogy is absolutely spot on. It highlights the physicality of thought.
The physicality of thought.
Thought is not just a floaty abstract concept, It is a physical process requiring structural resources. And this brings us to the record of 144 hours of meditation mentioned in the source materials.
144 hours. That is genuinely beyond my comprehension.
Most people view meditation as a form of passive rest. They think it's just shutting the brain off.
Yeah, just zoning out.
But maintaining a continuous, hyper-focused state of ultra-high-definition spatial and sensory mapping for 144 hours is not rest. It is an athletic feat of cognitive endurance.
An athletic feat. I love that phrasing because it frames the brain as a muscle under tension.
Exactly. By spending thousands of cumulative hours holding highly complex, multi-layered spatial and sensory relationships in your mind simultaneously, you are acting as the ultimate active architect of your cognitive hardware.
That's incredible.
That intense, prolonged internal mapping places a massive, healthy processing load on the hippocampus. It is physically reinforcing the synaptic density of your brain. You are forging an unprecedented cognitive reserve. Through Antaryanam, you are proving that we can be the active, deliberate architects of our own biological longevity.
The biological hardware will adapt to whatever load you place upon it. It all comes back to that max. Okay, so we've looked at the micro, the internal, and the digital. I want to zoom all the way out to the macro level now. Let's look at how our daily physical environments, the actual cities and neighborhoods we live in, passively dictate our baseline cognitive reserve.
Right, because let's be honest, not everyone is going to meditate for 144 hours, and not everyone is going to volunteer as a crisis mapper.
Exactly. We have to look at the baseline environmental friction that ordinary people experience just by walking out their front doors. And for that, we turn to a fascinating 2023 machine learning study.
This study is absolutely wild.
Researchers took a massive data set of 22,500 individuals. And they trained a machine learning algorithm to predict Alzheimer's rates.
Okay.
And the algorithm achieved 84% accuracy.
84% accuracy in predictive public health modeling is virtually unheard of. It is a stunning success rate.
But the craziest part is what the algorithm actually used to make the prediction.
Right. It wasn't medical data.
No. It didn't look at their diet. It didn't look at their genetic markers. It didn't analyze airborne pollutants or water quality. The algorithm predicted Alzheimer's rates purely based on the spatial complexity of the subject's ZIP codes.
The algorithm found a glaring correlation. Spatially complex, dense environments places with confusing nonlinear street networks, numerous irregular intersections, highly diverse physical landmarks, and multiple overlapping path options to get from point A to point B. They strongly correlated with significantly lower rates of Alzheimer's.
Okay, stop right there because I have to push back on this from a systems perspective, and this is where a lot of people will get confused.
Go for it.
A chaotic, messy city with incredibly dense street networks and nonlinear intersections that generates immense daily stress.
It does.
Anyone who has ever tried to drive in a chaotic, poorly planned, heavily congested city knows it spikes your blood pressure. You are constantly on edge. And isn't chronic cortisol the body's primary stress hormone? Well documented in the medical literature to be highly toxic to hippocampal cells.
It is.
So why is urban chaos suddenly being framed as better for brain longevity than living in a clean, predictable, master-planned grid?
That is exactly the contradiction that trips people up when they read this study, and it requires a vital clarification. We must strictly separate chronic emotional stress from acute cognitive friction.
Okay, differentiate those two for me because they feel really similar when you're stuck in traffic.
Chronic emotional stress, the feeling of being overwhelmed, in danger, or endlessly frustrated, and the resulting cortisol spikes do indeed degrade the hippocampus over time.
Stress is toxic to memory.
Yes. But the spatial complexity of a physical environment does not inherently produce chronic emotional stress once a person learns to navigate it.
Okay. So once you know the chaotic environment, you aren't terrified of getting lost anymore.
Yeah.
But you still have to actively calculate your way through it because it's so complex.
Precisely. The first week you live in a chaotic, messy city, you are stressed. The cortisol is high. But after 6 months, you know the city. You aren't stressed.
But the city hasn't changed.
Exactly. The physical environment hasn't changed. It is still nonlinear. Once navigated, a spatially messy environment ceases to be a stressor and transitions into acting as an ambient preventative maintenance protocol.
Oh, that's fascinating.
You cannot simply operate on autopilot. You must constantly use landmarks, assess changing angles, and actively update your mental position relative to your destination every single time you leave the house to buy groceries. It is a mandatory, low-level daily workout for your spatial circuitry. It provides the friction required to keep the hippocampus robust.
So flip the scenario. What about the beautiful, clean, master-planned grid? The affluent suburbs where everything is laid out in perfect right angles and cul-de-sacs.
A master plan grid is cognitively sterile.
Because it's too easy.
It requires almost zero active routing. You travel 4 blocks north, you turn right, you travel 3 blocks east. Every house looks similar. Every intersection is identical. It is the geographic equivalent of the fixed bus route we talked about at the very beginning of the stroll.
Right, the bus driver loop.
Yeah. Because it is so perfectly designed and predictable, it allows your spatial circuitry to go entirely dormant. And going dormant literally starves the hippocampus of the necessary friction it needs to maintain its gray matter volume.
That is deeply ironic, honestly. We spend billions of dollars trying to engineer out the friction in our urban design to make our lives easier and more comfortable. But in doing so, we are accidentally designing cognitive sterility.
By removing the environmental friction, we are depriving ourselves of the very biological load required to build a shield against neurodegeneration. We are building beautiful, easy cities that allow our brains to atrophy.
So what does this all mean for us today? Let's summarize the legacy code we have extracted on this digital stroll.
Yeah, let's tie it all together.
Lead architect Murty BVNS, as we curate this for you. The through line connecting all of this data is undeniable. Sustained active spatial reasoning forces the hippocampus to build redundant physical pathways, structurally shielding the brain against decline.
Yes. Whether that active spatial reasoning is dodging physical traffic in a black cab in London, managing dynamic, interlocking supply chains in Rail Nation, layering chaotic crisis data for Ushahidi, or mapping the 32 microparts of a single toe in advanced Antaryanam, The biological mechanism is exactly the same.
The brain is completely agnostic to the perspective. It doesn't care if it's egocentric or allocentric, physical or digital, but it is entirely dependent on the effort.
Right.
The cognitive friction is what builds the cognitive reserve.
Which brings us to the most urgent call to action of this entire Gurukul session.
The GPS warning.
We have to issue the GPS warning. Lead architect and everyone listening, every single time we blindly follow the glowing blue line on our smartphone's GPS without thinking, we are actively outsourcing our cognitive reserve to a device.
We are voluntarily turning our unique active daily commute into the fixed, cognitively sterile loop of a bus driver.
Yeah.
We are trading our long-term brain health for short-term convenience.
We must intentionally reintroduce spatial friction into our routines. Turn off the automated routing, look at a map before you leave, and then put the map away. Force your hippocampus to build the route, to make mistakes, to recalculate.
And I want to end this digital stroll with a final provocative thought for you to mull over. Lead architect.
I'm ready.
We've established the danger of the smartphone GPS. We know that our internal mapping circuitry degrades simply from outsourcing our routing to a flat 2D screen sitting in our cup holder.
Right.
But consider the impending era of ubiquitous augmented reality glasses.
That is a terrifying technological extrapolation.
When our physical world is constantly overlaid with glowing digital arrows, explicitly telling us exactly where to step, in real time, right in front of our eyes, perfectly mapped to the physical pavement, will we permanently eradicate cognitive friction from the human experience?
Wow.
If we never have to build a spatial map again, are we engineering an environment so frictionless, so utterly perfect, that we design our own biological obsolescence?
It is the ultimate question of our architectural future. How much friction do we need to remain human?
Lead architect Murti BVNS, we want to thank you for walking with us today on this digital stroll. It has been an absolute honor to decode this framework with you. Keep building those complex maps, keep rejecting the automated scripts of the modern world, and keep your cognitive architecture strong.
Thank you for joining us in the Gurukul. We will walk with you again soon.